Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, unamulwanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Tell your kids' teachers, their librarians, their principal, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Audible, Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, Ghana, Himalaya, wherever you find your podcasts. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by A is for Always, an adoption alphabet, written by Linda Cutting. Linda tells us that this book is inspired by her daughter, a Chinese-American girl adopted into an all-white family when she was only 6. She stomped down the hall carrying 2 books, demanding to know why her adoption book was different from her white brothers. Linda says her daughter asked her to write a book for adoptees from everywhere so no one would feel left out. A book that addressed the challenges as well as the joys of adoption. You and your kids are going to love this beautiful book. It's a beautiful message, and the illustrations are absolutely beautiful. Every page shows a different adopted family of cuddly animals welcoming and cherishing a new child. A is for Always. It hit number 1 on Amazon for new releases. It should be in your family library. Get your copy today. A is for Always, an adoption alphabet by Linda Cutting. Before we invite our guests into the studio, I want to ask you, are you looking for a unique way to support diverse voices in literature? Introducing By YQ Book Fairs, where every page tells a story of empowerment, culture, and diversity. By YQ Book Fairs is a 100% women and minority-owned initiative showcasing a hand-picked selection of diverse books that celebrate inclusivity and representation. From captivating narratives to thought-provoking poetry, our curated collection has something for everyone. And hosting a By YQ Book Fair is a super easy and a fantastic way to raise funds for your organization or cause. So why wait? Visit buyobq.com today to learn more about how you can bring the magic of diverse literature to your community while supporting women and minority-owned businesses. Join us right now from the wonderful state of Iowa. Our guest is here today to celebrate 2 really important books. U.S. Presidents Decoded, the U.S. Constitution Decoded. Please welcome to the show, Katie Kennedy. Hey, Katie, how are you?
I'm good. Yourself?
I am doing wonderful. I am fascinated to talk to you about these 2 books. What is it about these 2 institutions that needs to be decoded?
Well, the decoding is primary sources. I try to explain to kids what primary sources are and also secondary and tertiary, but we use little bits of primary sources throughout the text, and then I tried to explain what each one meant so the kids could actually look at them themselves. Now, for the Constitution, it's the whole document. We have the original text on the left page and the plain language version on the right-hand side, so the kids can actually see for themselves what's what. This backfired on me a little bit when our son was looking at the Constitution book and letters of marks and reprisal, which allows private citizens to function as pirates during time of war to attack enemy shipping. He now thinks he has a constitutional right to be a pirate. So I apologize to all shipping the Great Lakes. But...
Well, I think that this is a really valuable book to have in our homes because we have a lot of people who spend a lot of time arguing about politics and pontificating about politics, and they don't really know what they're talking about a lot of times. And, they just kind of, well, the Constitution says this. Well, really, where does it say that? Well, but so-and-so told me. And, our kids should, go deeper. LeVar Burton was here on the podcast, and, he said, being able to read and being literate, it's emancipating. It allows us to go out there and get the information so we can think for ourselves. And these two books sound like that is exactly what you're giving kids.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do, and to bring to them the idea that we don't just make stuff up. This is based on certain things. So when, it's important to know what's in the document of the Constitution, important to know the history of the presidents, and the leadership of the country, but also how do we know that? What is the source material? So I wanted to include things that were, would show people what's actually there. I came across in the process of that, a letter, in the Library of Congress. I did a lot of very wide reading, because it was fun. Read probably 3,000 pages of the congressional record, up at 2 a.m. is tiny, tiny print. But I came across some things I would not have otherwise. Because I wasn't looking for specific things. I was looking at the material, and then you pull from that the way it's supposed to go, the direction that research should flow. And, but I came across a letter from James Madison, the person most important in the Constitution, in the writing of the Constitution, to a William Tyler. And Madison just lays into him for 12 pages. And Madison had a very laid-back personality. He was a physically small man. He was the smallest president. He did not have a forceful personality. He was probably the least capable, kind of the opposite of Lyndon Johnson in his ability to twist your arm, right? And to get James Madison, that was something. And I thought, who is this William Tyler? Because I've never heard of this guy, and I know this period, and who could possibly? And I did some research, and I looked at it, and I thought, I have read in the congressional record the quote that Madison puts in of what his opponent, the guy he's writing to, said, that was John Tyler. So I read that in the congressional record a couple weeks ago. He's responding to John Tyler, and I double-checked and cross-referenced the dates and everything, and that was right. It was simply mislabeled. So I was able to contact the Library of Congress, and they've corrected it. A real understandable mistake. They said Mr. Tyler. The letters fell apart. It kind of looked like William. But John Tyler was a future president, and the idea that he made James Madison angry enough, which is almost impossible to do, that Madison sat down and wrote him 12 angry pages, explaining to him exactly what the Constitution is and how it functions and why he's wrong on basically everything. So it's a letter from one, a former president to a future president, schooling him on the U.S. Constitution. And it was a really fun thing for me to find. It's not a huge deal in the scheme of things, but for me, it was kind of a fun thing to come across. And I want to get that across to kids that, you do want to interact with the material itself. You do want to reduce the number of filters between you and the material. Look at the documents, look at the letters, get a feel for the presidents themselves, read the Constitution itself. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. One of the things that I've heard is that, the Constitution, it's so old. It was written by dead white men. It was written by slave owners and all these people who had all these faults, and women weren't allowed to contribute to it. So we should just tear it up and start over. What would you say to those folks?
I think it's a terrible mistake. I understand the desire for greater inclusion today. Certainly many of the, not all, but many of the writers of the Constitution owned slaves. Certainly there was a blind spot. But if you look at we don't have a record. They didn't keep a record of, but James Madison kept a journal. So we kind of have a record of what went on. And a number of them wrote letters later talking about what had happened. There were there was not this kind of monolithic viewpoint, including on slavery. There was on women. Nobody was advocating giving women the vote. There were people who advocated ending slavery, including slave owners. James Madison, who absolutely owned many slaves and was a quintessential Virginia plantation owner. I mean, he has no anyone who wants to fault that, which I think we all should, absolutely can find fault with Madison there. But he spoke eloquently against the slave trade and wanted to end the international slave trade. So it's not monolithic, and I think we make a mistake with that. But beyond that, the document itself is just brilliant in many places. It needs to be adjusted for modern times, but they were wise enough to put in that amendment capability so that we can change that. And we have 27 times. 27 times have we changed the Constitution. George Washington, of course, was the president of the Constitutional Convention, and as such, he stayed out of the discussions as they were wrangling all this out. He felt it was not his place. But one time he spoke up. They were afraid of a standing army, one that was always there. Of course, now with modern technology, you have to have a standing army. You know, missiles come in fast. But they didn't at the time. They were afraid of that, and they were considering putting in a limit to the size of the U.S. Army that they could never have more than 5,000 men. 5,000 troops maximum would be in the Constitution. And at that one point, Washington spoke up to add, perhaps you should also put in, no one else is allowed to invade with more than 3,000. And then people, you know, kind of got the point. Can you imagine? I mean, we would have had to have had an amendment, of course, for things like that. So they worked fairly wisely, I think, to use the amendment process.
Yeah. I think it's, I think that these books will open up as we're sitting down and reading this book with our kids, and both of these books with our kids, I think that in addition to helping our kids understand more about our presidents and more about the Constitution, I think parents are going to suddenly like, really? I didn't know this. And this is because we're so busy that we don't have time to really dig in deep. And it's been a long time since I went to high school, and I don't know if I studied this in high school. So that's one of the reasons that I love encouraging families to read, because it's a great way not only for kids to learn, but for parents too.
Absolutely. We've heard from a lot of teachers, including homeschooling parents, who keep a copy hidden in their drawer. And when the kid asks a question, there's just a minute, you know, and they're leafing through. My parents are in their 80s, upper 80s, and they had friends over yesterday. And yesterday morning, another couple came to visit and picked up 2 copies of Presidents off their coffee table, where my mother proudly displays my books. And they just sat there and read them. And my parents said, we got no visit, because they were like, shh, I'm reading. But they had a good time with it, of course. But, you know, most people, you're right, most people don't remember that Grover Cleveland was terrible to Civil War veterans. It was terrible on veterans issues. And here was a guy who had not gone to the Civil War. He paid someone to go in his stead, which was legal. But he paid somebody else, a Polish immigrant, to go. The man was badly injured, suffered for the rest of his life. And then Grover Cleveland doesn't want to do everything in terms of pensions, that some people did. Obviously, you can argue pensions and budgets, and, you know, they're important issues. But it makes Cleveland come off looking pretty bad to a lot of people, shortly after that conflict. Nobody remembers that. Mm-hmm. You know, you go around with a microphone on the street, ask people about Grover Cleveland, you get maybe that he was the only guy to serve non-consecutive terms, but nothing else.
Yeah. Really, really important stuff. Is it a coincidence that someone who lives in Iowa, the first caucus state, writes about the presidents?
It is. Nothing to do with it. But the Iowa caucuses are always interesting. And at the point we're speaking, they're over now for this year, for this cycle. And I'm glad, because we can watch television again without the constant commercials. They hit us pretty hard. But it's interesting to see history unfold
Yeah, yeah. One of the things I want to dig a little bit deeper into, you're talking about primary sources and tertiary sources. Can you just, for those of us who aren't all that bright, just remind us what you mean when you use those terms?
Sure, thank you. Primary sources have no filter between you and the subject. They're the hardest to use, but you get the most accurate information. So examples of primary sources would be letters that somebody wrote to someone else, excuse me, an account of a battle by someone who was there, a speech, something like that. John F. Kennedy, when he was, before he was president, when he fought in World War II, was shipwrecked, basically. I mean, their ship was hit by a torpedo. One of his comrades was badly wounded. Kennedy, who had been on the swim team at Harvard, gets the guy's life jacket strap in his mouth and swims 3 miles through the ocean to I can't make it to the other end of the pool, 3 miles through ocean to a island, and then scratches on a green coconut that they need help. That's a primary source. That coconut is a primary source. So it doesn't have to be a written thing. That's a direct thing. Abraham Lincoln, at the beginning of the Civil War, had his pocket watch in a repair shop when Fort Sumter was fired upon in South Carolina. And the pocket watch, the jeweler scratched on the inside of the president's watch case that this had just happened and that his hopes went with the president. And thank God we have a government, he said. Thank God we have a government. Gives it, fixes it, gives it back to Lincoln, who probably never knew that this man's hopes rode with him throughout the Civil War, right there in his pocket or off his waistcoat. That's a primary source, right there. There was a letter from a tailor to a man who was a slave catcher after the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, brought his coat in for repair. The man returned it unrepaired and said he would rather die than repair a coat for somebody like that. It's primary source. So there's no filter there between you and that source. A school lunch menu could be a primary source for food availability, what kinds of things people were eating, anything like that. Secondary sources are your basic history book. You go and pull off a biography of George Washington off the shelf, or the Battle of Gettysburg. Some hopefully historian has written using primary sources and has pulled the narrative together for you. It's much easier to understand what happened. You do have a filter, though. That person's biases, their mistakes, would be part of that. Then a tertiary source would be like Wikipedia, an encyclopedia, something like that. It's much easier to use. It is much more likely to have mistakes. Historians call that bird vomit because it's already been digested for you. Nobody wants bird vomit, right? So you want to do a little bit of your own research as much as you can.
I'm imagining that it would be, we talk to authors and they've written a STEM book about nature. It's like so much fun to get out there into nature. I'm thinking it could be a lot of fun just to kind of do some research and maybe just, not so much to dig into the Constitution but maybe encouraging a 7-year-old, 8-year-old to do some research into the family and what kind of primary sources and what, how did grandma and grandpa grow up and, do that kind of research.
Yeah, absolutely. Family history is great fun. A lot of people have been taking DNA tests recently. Certainly don't have to do that. Some people don't want to. But that has jump-started an interest, I think, for more people who've, discovered some fascinating things. I'm all Scottish. My family came here after the Highland clearances before the American Revolution. How did we keep marrying Scots? Why am I not 12% Romanian or 3% Italian? It's unbelievable. That's a weird thing. So people have fun with that. But yeah, I would encourage people, and local history too, beyond family history. What are the oldest houses in your community? What were the important, why is your town where it is? Why? Was it built along a river, along a railroad track? The town I live in thought it was going to be the state capitol, and they put in a huge courthouse trying to lure things there, and they didn't get it. So we got a really nice courthouse in a really small town. Things like that can be fascinating to find out. Was there a president from your state?
Mm-hmm.
And if not, find out some about him. If not, who was the closest? Or did any president live in your state for a while?
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, you find fascinating connections.
Yeah, yeah. And, even if your kid isn't fascinated with history, I think it's really important, like we've encouraged families to do when we're talking about nature and the STEM fields, it's encouraging curiosity, encouraging your kids to wonder, to observe, and to ask questions.
Yeah. Well, and even which president was most like you. Harding played a ton of instruments, musical instruments. If you're a saxophonist or like to smash those cymbals, maybe Harding's your guy. Ulysses S. Grant, the general who won the Civil War and then became president, and was a much better president than we usually give him credit for. He loved fast horses. Man, Grant was not a big guy. We think he was a big guy. He wasn't. He was 5'8". He weighed about 140 pounds through the Civil War. That's a normal sized guy. That is not a big guy. But he loved fast horses. And at his West Point graduation, he did not finish particularly high. He got a lot of demerits for untied shoes. Almost didn't graduate because of his untied shoes. But they had a horse nobody else could ride. And they had, at the end of that graduation, they had Grant ride that horse right straight towards the crowd, full gallop. And they had a high bar set there. And Grant would have that horse jump that high bar and then come to a screeching halt before he went into the crowd. It was a real splashy finish. Nobody else could even ride that horse. And of course, if you don't stop it, you squish somebody's grandma, right? Grant does it, and they knew he could do it. They wouldn't have, if they weren't sure, they wouldn't have let him. But he's the guy who got a speeding ticket when he was president, and was taken. He wasn't just given a ticket. And people have talked about this some with former President Trump's legal issues right now. Another president who had some legal problems, Grant was not only given a ticket, he was taken downtown and booked. I mean, they did the full thing.
Wow.
The process, and the officer apologized to him, and Grant said, "No, you're doing exactly the right thing." Mm-hmm. He said, "I was going too fast, and I'm going to do it again."
We have to tell everybody where they can go to find out more about U.S. Presidents Decoded and U.S. Constitution Decoded.
The Presidents Decoded, the Constitution Decoded are available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, any place your local independent bookseller, any place they sell books.
Yeah. And where can they go to find out more about you, Katie?
My website is katiekennedybooks.com. And I need to update it, but I'm in the process.
Awesome.
So
awesome.
Yeah.
We've had a really fun time speaking to the author of U.S. Presidents Decoded and U.S. Constitution Decoded. Our guest has been Katie Kennedy. Katie, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. To make sure you don't miss a moment of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Good Pods, Boomplay, Player FM, wherever you find your podcast. And please be sure to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can click on the Parents Click Here button at the top of the page, check out our blog, our certified great reads, and download our free online magazine. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our amazing guests. I also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Kyoko Ito, Nick Warner, Sydney Swan, Kayla Newland, Kristen Barrett, Hannah Rose. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. You are amazing. You are the most important person in your kid's life, and you make the world a better place every time you choose to read with your kid. I'll be looking to you in the next exciting episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.